Hello, everybody. Welcome to episode 12 of Ignite podcast. I am so excited because we have a guest who has been with us before, but not just because of the guest who's coming. We also have a very interesting topic. I hope that we'll be able to pack it and that everyone will be ignited today to move in the right direction to heal. I'll let her introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. My name is Paps Wanyugi. I'm a wellness and confidence coach and also an author. And I'm so glad to be here. Thanks for having me again, Shirley.
No, it's always nice to have you. You always come with so much wisdom and such interesting and valuable insight. And when I thought about the topic, the first person I thought about doing this topic with was you. I was like, you have to come back.
I am really honored. It's such a joy being on Ignite again.
Okay, welcome. Today we are looking at childhood wounds. The dictionary describes childhood wounds these are emotional and psychological wounds that can be caused by experiences or relationships during our formative years. They can be caused by a variety of traumatic events, such as physical, verbal, or sexual abuse, neglect, abandonment, or even just feeling unloved or misunderstood. So these are the wounds that we experience in our very formative and young years. And today's episode will be trying to look at what happens when these wounds are inflicted. And a lot of times they're inflicted by people intentionally or unintentionally. It can be your parent, it can be a teacher, it can be a sibling. What happens to these wounds when they are processed by a child in the way that a child can process them, and then they become a way that someone processes life as an adult? How do these wounds, when left untouched and unhealed, how do they show up in our lives as adults, and is it good for us? I don't know if you would be able to maybe... In your own words, how would you describe childhood wounds?
All right. So I will describe childhood wounds using a story. And this story is, or probably just an illustration of a human child is the most vulnerable creature. And why? It's because in their formative years, they are totally dependent. For example, if a giraffe gets a baby giraffe, that baby giraffe will start walking in a few hours. The same thing to a calf, the same thing to any other animal that reproduces. But a human being's child, by the time they're getting to a place of dependence, it's probably in another 2 years.
Okay.
And so that longevity means that everything that happens to them, they are at the mercies of the person who is with them.
Ooh.
Their perspective on self and their perception of who even they are, it's like the identity formation. It depends on what they are told, how they are treated. And so there's a lot of messaging around it. And then childhood wounds, it means that those were wounds that were inflicted in those vulnerable times in our lives. And so much as I'm an adult right now, if I have childhood wounds, then it means that everything that happened in my formative years are still places that I'm helpless. And there's still places that I'm bleeding.
Oh, that's deep. So even if you're an adult, you can be walking around with a wound that happened to you, something that happened to you as a child. And I do think that a lot of times people think that a wound has to be something dramatic, like not dramatic, but something extreme, and painful. And for some people, that is the childhood they had. It can be sexual abuse, it can be physical abuse, but sometimes it can be as simple as something as favoritism from a parent going out of their way to prefer one child over the other child. And sometimes maybe even the parent is not aware that this is what they're doing. And so you say that these wounds are something that we carry with ourselves even into our adulthood, whether we are aware of it or not aware of it.
And so what happens is, most of the things that happened to me when I was a child, it happened to me in my body as a child, in my psyche as a child. But then as I grow up, it's like my body still feels it. In terms of if, for example, it was a sexual violation, my body still, much as I'm growing, I don't lose that experience. My body still knows, like it still feels the violence, the violation. I still feel probably the pain, And then number two, also the mind doesn't forget the experience. And you see, our mind is usually a space where, despite probably something happening 20 years ago, my memory doesn't know what is current and what is past. So when I retrieve that file, my body will actually feel like this is happening now. And so there is that is why we usually talk about trauma response. or trauma reaction, because
okay.
my mind cannot tell what happened 20 years ago and what happened now. So long as that file is retrieved, it processes it now.
Oh, it's like it's happening right now.
Yeah.
Even if it's like 10 years or even
Yes.
20 years from the moment that the wound was inflicted.
Oh yeah, and so the 5-year-old the 3-year-old, they show up in the 40-year-old body, but they still behave and feel and own up that experience of the 3-year-old. And so it's important to just understand your body cannot be able to differentiate between, your mind especially cannot be able to differentiate between what happened then and what is happening now. And that, especially when I've not processed it, then it means that it's just an auto reaction. It's an auto reaction.
And a lot of times, I think most children don't know how to process.
Yeah. That
even
is
most
true.
adults, but I think a lot of we are not given the tools of how to process. This has happened to me. Maybe my parents said something, but they were having a bad day. They didn't mean it. Or the teacher is overwhelmed, and so, or maybe the teacher might have a personal or her own personal issues, and so she's inflicting it on.
Yeah, just
on
a
me.
projection.
I had a very interesting story. It was in a podcast. I think yesterday when I was listening to a podcast yesterday, and this lady was talking about her experience in dating. And she was saying that when she, as a child growing up, her father was not dependable. The parents separated, and the dad was very neglectful. He'd make promises that I will be there, I'll pick you up on Saturday. And she'd be up the whole day by the window side waiting for this father to come. And the father never, ever came. And so she was looking back on her life, and she was saying the consequence of this rejection and neglect from her father, whatever was happening with the father, we don't know, but he was never available for her in the way that she needed a father to be there. So the result of it in her adulthood was that she became very boy crazy. Jumping from one relationship to another. And she was looking back and laughing and saying that, interestingly enough, she was always attracted to men who wouldn't give her what she needed, like her father never gave her. Yeah. So she was saying, like, this happened for 15 years. Moving from one relationship, dating the same kind of man who'd reject her. It's almost like she's replaying the wound. And she was saying she had to come to a point where she had to have a realization and say, this is the consequence of this rejection. So I don't know, do you have examples, or even maybe even personal examples of how a childhood wound, or even something that you've had, a childhood wound, and how it can show up in our adulthood and how we process things?
First of all, that girl, I really resonate with her, because I also had a dad that I never knew when he will come back, or if he will come back. There are so many nights I will even wake up in the morning, and then I just go to his bed, and then I'm like, hakukuja, like these are 2 days, these are 3 days. And of course I will really dread it. Something bad happened to him. And then later when he comes, and then probably there is nothing serious to explain, I'll just be like, did you choose that over us? I was also that child that will dress up on Saturday morning, today we are going out, and then someone else calls, and then he leaves. And then he comes back probably after a weekend. My dad probably loved partying, and I really loved my dad. I still do. He's late many years ago. But just that part of how that unreliability would later play out in my life. Like, I really struggle with people who don't have integrity. I really did. I would find myself now overreacting, which is actually now the trauma response. That person will be like, Paps, nijutu sikukuja.
Okay.
Is it just because I didn't probably do whatever I promised? And so when you look at it, you will actually realize, it will play out later if you don't have consciousness. And so your level of reaction, what happens when you probably have childhood trauma, you can still probably get angry, but your anger of something that will be this level usually explodes up to this level. And then everybody is like, okay, is that just because of this? It's like you kill every fly with a hammer. So and of course you run after it. And
the wound has been triggered.
Yeah, so it's a trigger. So this replays out something that I've not dealt with in terms of how my dad probably didn't show up, how my dad probably also just the fact that probably he may have had a good reason, but just because there was no communication. And then there was that fear. And so what would happen, fast track many years later, I get married. My husband is very independent. He never found any reason to tell me that he will come late. And then when he comes, Kosovo, because I'm like, why didn't you tell me you will be late? When his phone goes off, I will be so anxious. Like, there's a time he was driving from Mombasa, he'd gone to pick a car, and then all of a sudden I've called him, 1 hour, 2 hours is not picking up. I'm like, bus. The guy crashed. It's like you get to the worst case scenario very quickly.
Okay.
And of course, that is a trauma response. So it has been a lot of journey working through it in terms of, you'll realize every time, every now and then in your life, there's something that will happen that will actually trigger the places you've not healed. And so that childhood trauma in terms of, for example, if it's neglect. And then what will happen, for example, if you have trauma response, it will be, number one, there's the aspect of I'm very controlling.
Okay. Oh, because you don't want what happened to you to happen again.
So I learned to protect myself. And you see, control is not just controlling other people. It's also a place of controlling myself where I don't care. Ukikuja hata next year, for all I care. So I learned how to protect my heart by that aspect of control. But it's in terms of I control my environment. I don't allow myself to be vulnerable. And of course, the other thing is being clingy. So that is the other extreme.
Oh, so it's possible.
Just like, don't leave me, please. Next time explain to me. I was so worried. I stayed up. Unafika sangapi. Like I keep on calling you after every 5 minutes. That's clinginess.
Okay.
Yeah. And so what happens also most of the times when I have wounds that I've not healed from, I would most likely attract someone who we are trauma bonding.
Ooh.
So trauma bonding means that we bond of our traumas. So ninakufeel, unanifeel, but then you end up abusing each other.
Do you unintentionally recreate the same situation? It's almost like you're looking for you're looking for closure, eh?
Oh yeah.
And so you keep recreating your childhood situation in your adult situation.
Yes.
Because I guess you said this, the child who remains unhealed is always carried along. And so is it that the child in you is that we need to heal from, we need to find closure on this matter. And until we find closure, we'll keep recreating the pattern until some closure is found, or it now becomes can even become a generational pattern unintentionally. Yeah.
And of course, what happens in that situation, it's that aspect of subconsciously, I'm also trying to fix that person the way I should have fixed my dad, because I lost that fight with him.
Okay, that's
and so I'm like,
deep.
now I need to put this person on the line. And so you behave like a rescuer in that relationship. But you also don't realize that you have a trauma response. But every time, if anybody asks you, you're the nice person, you're the savior, you're like, he has to change. I have to change him. And most of the times when I meet probably ladies who are struggling in relationships that are abusive, and probably in this manner that will say this is a narcissistic relationship, most of the times there is no introspection of what have I not healed from that caused me to attract this person.
What is my contribution to like attracting this person?
Like, how did we end up here? How did I even end up with such a highly dysfunctional person? Because whoever they are, they were. Most of the times, whoever they were, they were. And so probably there were red flags that I ignored, or I just trivialized something that I didn't know how the magnitude of that thing would affect me later. And so later I'm stuck. And of course, I'm tired of rescuing them. Because I'm tired of trying to fix them.
So you can be going around calling everyone a narcissist, but you are actually you're the one actually seeking a project you're looking for someone to build, to correct, and for some reason there's the lie is that if I find this project and if I correct it, then maybe I can heal.
Yeah, can heal
without even being aware of it. Yeah?
Of course, the childhood traumas are very complex. I mean, the complexity is complicated. So most of the times, even being able to see those relationships and to see the correlation between my actions, my behavior, and what happened to me and what they are doing to me, I never say it, because most of the times you will think, so what happens in every relationship, we usually show up in 3 modes.
Okay.
Number 1, you show up as a parent, where you're here to mother and father everyone.
Okay.
And so you show up as a parent, and that is your permanent posture. The rescuer, the doer, let's get this done. You're always on top of things.
So when you're wounded, these are the 3 ways which you show up.
These are the 3 ways everyone shows up. And so it will now see whether you're wounded or not. There's one that is probably functional. And then the other way, you will show up as a child. Take care of me.
Okay, I have.
Love me. Don't leave me. I need you. And so you are always on the doormat mode. And then now the third way to show up in a relationship, which is usually functional, is the adult. Because the adult is able to make rational decisions.
Okay.
And so most of the times when you're talking to the adult in you, you'll be like, okay, Paps, so do you realize this is not your dad? This is your husband.
Okay.
Yeah. Do you realize he doesn't have the same context of being left or a dad who never showed up?
Okay.
And so can you first of all detach? your previous experiences from the reality. Because every time the adult needs to mediate between the inner child and the adult.
Okay.
So that this adult that you are right now is able to make rational decisions, because the adult is, amesoma, they have gone through life, they've been cultured, so they can make better decisions. But you see the problem, the moment there is no mediation, and that mediation factor is usually self-awareness. And so I can be able to catch myself every time. I'm like, oh, you are going down the pit again.
Okay.
You are going to the gutter again, because what would happen, for example, let's talk about that situation of, I am reacting that way because James came late. He probably didn't say. There was a very good reason behind that.
Okay.
Like he really communicates nowadays. And sometimes when he doesn't, because I've also grown, I don't feel that need to probably overly react.
Okay.
And so what will happen in that situation, it's me being able to remind myself, perhaps James is not your dad. He's also an independent adult. He can also choose to communicate or not. Nobody owes you. You can't control people.
I do know that, yeah.
And again, the other thing is, perhaps he doesn't mean because he didn't probably call you and everything, he has abandoned you or he's planning to leave. Because probably that was the narrative I had in my mind. Much as dad never left, but sometimes I would be like, what if he leaves us and he never comes back? What if he dies?
Okay.
And then you're like, okay, what is the worst that could happen? And so you need to keep on having that inner voice conversation with yourself when you're struggling with childhood trauma. Because your responses are a bit irrational. Your perception is irrational in terms of even how you see yourself. Because, for example, when I keep on autopiloting as an adult, then I start parenting everyone. I assume everyone needs a mother.
And not everyone does. Huh?
Yeah, not everyone does. Actually, people need an adult.
Yeah.
You can't keep on fixing me and always making me look like I'm a project. It's exhausting.
It will be exhausting on you, and it will prevent the other part. You become an enabler.
Actually, it is more exhausting on the other person even than yourself, because you see, for you, it gives you a kick.
Yeah.
Whenever you feel like, I fixed everyone. I'm the one who fixes everyone in my family. Now I'm married to you. I'll come and fix everyone in your family. And then we'll be one big happy family. But you don't realize that actually your perception of self is also dysfunctional, because you see yourself as a savior. You are not.
You're only human. Eh?
And again, you're just responsible for yourself, really.
Yeah, that's true.
And so what happens is now the other dysfunctions that will come from that aspect is overfunctioning. You're always on overdrive. You're always tired. You're always in debt. You're always, like, every time you're just on the overdrive of, I'm fixing people, I'm fixing this nation one person at a time or one family at a time. And then you've placed yourself an impossible mission, because people don't want to be fixed. People want to be loved. People want to be understood. People want to be respected.
Okay.
And so most of the times you'll realize the moment you are a fixer, and of course your auto response from the childhood trauma is overfunctioning, then you surround yourself with people who are underfunctioning.
So that you can get your kick.
They even stop functioning. It's like conveniently. They're just like, atafanya, you just don't do it. You'll see, they will just kick in. Yeah, you just get yourself in debt. They will bail you out. They can't leave you. And so you start even enabling other people's dysfunctions around you.
At the same time, you're complaining that they can't do better. But at the same time, you want them not to do better because you're getting something. And so it's like your life is not peaceful.
It's actually codependency. Because as long as you keep that cycle, it's gifting you. With time, it's also gifting them, because they get the bailouts. Alternatively, there are also people whose trauma response, especially on childhood trauma, is underfunctioning. Because you remember you are helpless when you are a child. You are helpless. It's like other people are to take care of you. Other people are to make decisions for you. This is even deeper for people who are taken care of by third parties. In terms of your parents are not primary caregivers.
Okay.
And you see many people underestimate how that adversely, it's actually an adverse childhood trauma.
Nobody ever thinks of it as
you had to survive.
Yeah.
And you see, sometimes we look at those children, we're like, they are so adaptable, they get along everywhere. No, that is a trauma kind of an adaptation, because it was a survival instinct.
They needed to survive.
So they had to be nice everywhere, because you'll be with this relative for 1 month, unaosha vyombo, like everywhere you are, you're just being tossed around. And so in your survival instincts, you come across as a very nice person. You come across as an adaptable. You're just like, me, I can survive anyway. It's true. But you see, those are your survival instincts.
The cost of that is very heavy. Eh?
Very, very. Because either you will become extremely adaptive in a way you never enjoy abundance, because every time you live on your bare minimum. Alternatively, you will also become explosive in terms of now wanting to overcompensate to your inner child.
Oh my gosh.
And so there are so many things out here that will actually project as a wounded inner child. And of course, all those things that you mentioned in terms of causes of inner child. So one of the things is to look at yourself and you're like, where is all this coming from?
Okay.
And especially when I feel like I'm not functional, where is this coming from? What is this telling me? And of course, some of the inner wounds of a child, like inner child wounds, we have not sat down with them enough. Because you remember also when you were suffering and struggling when you were a child, nobody validated it.
And you didn't know how to process. You're just a child. I had a conversation with a friend the other day, and she was saying that her child is misbehaving. Like in all of a sudden he was a good child, but he's misbehaving. And then she had to go back and see, okay, for him, it's changed. He was misbehaving because now he has a new sibling. And so the attention is not there. And so he cannot articulate. A child cannot articulate, I have been hurt in this way, or I feel like I'm not getting enough attention.
Yes,
and so their reaction is to now cause trouble to act out. And there are some people even who still act out as grown-ups.
I know, we still throw adult tantrums.
Response we have as children is the same response we are still carrying on as children. And I like the point where you say that it's so complex that every individual is so different. The same thing can happen to one person, and one person can become like a parent. Sometimes a mother can be neglectful. I think also a lot of times you always see that it's the fathers who are neglectful. There are some people who their story is their mother was a horrible mother, or their mother. Okay, and a lot of times this also comes from other issues. So you have a situation where maybe you have a parent who is this way, and you have two children, and the way it affects them is two completely different. You have one who might be extremely clingy, and you have one who keeps attracting the wrong person. So everyone is reacting it in the and sometimes it's not always easy to identify that this childhood wound, that because my mother treated my sibling as the favorite, I don't feel worthy. I don't feel like I'm good enough. And so I spend my life looking for maybe the person in the office to try and copy, because on my own I don't feel like I'm because my parent was always like, why can't you be like that person? And on the outside it doesn't look like something like a wound. And I think childhood wounds are more harder to identify when they don't look like physical abuse, when they don't look like emotional abuse, when they are subtle. Something, and I'm trying to think of an example instead of favoritism. I'm trying to think, or maybe a kid who's forced to be a grown-up before their time.
That is the
maybe your mother or your father.
They overkill on responsibility. They're actually called the child parents.
Because maybe your parents are alcoholics, and so you have to be a grown-up and take care of your siblings. Or your mom is always working. Or your father is always working. And so you as the eldest, that's traumatizing for a child. But it doesn't look like that. You'll be told like you're responsible. I don't know.
My child is very well adjusted. Actually, there's a girl who said like she took herself to Form 1. Like she went and looked for the school. She figured out everything that is needed, the requirements. She came, bought them, like she admitted herself to school. Oh. And of course, everybody will be like, you are so brave. Yeah, but you see, at the same time, when you talk to her on the offside, she's like, nobody was there for me. Yeah. Nobody was there for, like, I have how many relatives again? And nobody could take me to school and get me admitted as a 15-year-old. Oh. And then, of course, there's also this other aspect of that autopilot parenting, where maybe my child comes back home, they know where we hide the key, or they have their copy, they stay by themselves, they make their own dinner, they eat, they watch TV, I come at 10, and then probably the same loop in the morning, I leave early, they have to figure themselves out. And so this child is parenting themselves.
And it's one of those things where there is no way to avoid it, because the mother has to work. This is the economy. This is how life is happening. But it also doesn't take away. And a lot of people think that if I acknowledge that my parent or the person who's supposed to take care of me wounded me, that they were bad. It doesn't.
They were
have to
doing
mean,
their best. Actually, most of the times in all the woundings that we go through, we first of all need to come from that premises that most of those people, of course, there is willful hurting.
There are those who
there are people who are just malicious, outrightly, downright. And most of the times, it's also because they were hurting and they didn't know. They're just projecting their wounds on me. Sometimes even by doing that, I don't know whether it was just lethargic in terms of they're trying to get the past out of their wounds. And then in the process, they hurt me. But sometimes there's just that parent who is, that is the best I can do. At least I am doing my best. At least I show up home. And especially, for example, just think about that single parent who probably cannot afford daycare or cannot afford to have another adult live with them so that they can take care of their child. I mean, they will still end up there. And one of the things that would happen in such situations is conversations. Just keep on talking and just keep on being like, yeah, by the way, I know I leave you for long hours. Yeah, probably this is temporary. Next year, this will change. If I keep on working this way, then this will be the effect of it. So that this person is reassured that this is not really neglect. It's not something that is happening permanently. It's actually a temporary arrangement as we try to cope with this transition and this new thing. And then, of course, there's also that aspect of this child that is feeling that way. Probably it's also because there's comparison and they actually start feeling like there's something wrong with me. Is it because I am not a nice person? Is it because, like most of the times, the default settings of childhood wounds, we blame ourselves.
And that's like, even like kids will blame themselves for parents divorcing. Like as
Even
a child,
even
you
for
even
being
have
raped, even for being abused,
yes,
they'll just be like, it's because I'm not a nice person. Maybe if I was like this, maybe if I did this, dad would not have done this, or maybe this uncle, or even this person that is a stranger will not have done this. I remember meeting a girl who was abused, and then she will just keep on feeling like, if I had worn a trouser that day, I would not have been raped. And so I will be wearing trousers throughout. And you see, that is a trauma response. And so for her, it looks like a fashion statement. But at the same time, and of course, when you think about it from this perspective, it's how the narratives of childhood, they powerfully condition our conclusions of adulthood.
And the thing that is the most scary about it is that these narratives we form about life are formed by a child who they are not developed emotionally, mentally, in any way. And as a child, and I think that when you talk about self-evaluation, it is so important. We can be walking around carrying ideologies and foundational beliefs about things that we, like maybe as a child, someone did something to you, and so you form a narrative around that thing. And this narrative becomes the same narrative that you carry with yourself as an adult. And you never stop as an adult to ask yourself, wait a minute, where did this narrative come from? Is it even true? Which is and true? So this narrative can be affecting your life, but you're not even aware that it was not right, because as a child, and I think I was telling you about the child who was misbehaving, you don't have the tools to be able to process.
Even the perspective.
Yes.
Because sometimes perspective is not being able to see everything for what it is.
Yes.
You don't have that in you.
You're not emotionally able to process these things. And so if this becomes your gospel truth, you're walking around with a gospel truth that you concluded when you were 10 or 5. Like when you really think about it, it is really is ridiculous. But we are like so caught up in the motion of life, just going through life.
Yeah.
Because a teacher told you that when you're 10, something is wrong with you. From the age of 10, this becomes something you keep telling yourself when you're 30.
Imagine
a conversation with a lady who was probably having a bad day. And a lot of times it becomes like we continue to live our lives like something is wrong with me. I'm not good. Instead of sitting down and asking, so where did this narrative, is this even true? Where did this narrative come from?
Yeah. And I believe, okay, let me just give first of all a breakdown of how conditioning happens in situations. Number one, there's an event that happens. So an event is anything. Either it's something I even hear.
Yes, it
it's
can
something
be a hearing.
I saw. It's something I experienced. For example, we experience a slap is an experience. Like in terms of it's something that was done to me.
Okay.
But sometimes it's something as easy as probably just something I heard that was not true. Like the way you're saying a teacher said. Or maybe something I saw in terms of I kept on observing the environment I grew up in. And then, of course, it started conditioning my belief about myself, about people, about marriage, about men are dogs, or, women are cats. All that conditioning happens during those formative years. And then what happens after an event, there's always that part of, I need to give event that meaning for it to have power over me.
Okay.
And so that attributing meaning, we usually say now it's the thought process. I process it. And so I'm just like, okay, so what does this mean? For example, if I'm slapped by a madman on the road, I wouldn't give it much thought. I'll be like, but if I'm slapped by my husband or someone close, then that slap, it's a slap to my soul. It's like you've really slapped a very deep part of me. In a way, it's a deep cut kind of a wound. So everything that happened in our childhood, before we gave it meaning, it didn't have meaning. It was just an event.
Okay.
Just like the rain has no meaning until you give it meaning.
Okay.
Because if you have clothes outside and they were almost dry and you don't have clothes for tomorrow, then that meaning is dread. If you have sowed your seeds and you're a very happy farmer, then rain is welcome. Well, but not the floods. And so until you give it meaning, it doesn't have meaning. And then after you've given it meaning in terms of a thought, then that is when you feel.
Okay.
So the feel part comes down there. And then after feel is the belief and the actions.
Okay.
And then after that is the outcome. And so many people don't understand, if you don't reprogram everything, for example, attribute new meanings to everything that has happened to you. You know, you need to go and ask yourself, was this true?
Okay. Yeah.
So what I was told, was it true? When they said I'm useless, was it true?
Okay.
And of course, when you look at the narrative of most of the cartoons, especially those characters that are a bit permanent, like in a Cinderella when you were growing up, those were still parts of conditioning.
Okay.
You know, it was still part of conditioning in terms of it taught me how to see myself.
Okay.
It taught me how to think about myself. And so those were narratives in terms of, for example, sometimes I look at the Beauty and the Beast and I'm like, were they endorsing that abusive relationship?
Okay,
because you are a catch for your dad to get out of a situation, you know. So what does that do to that girl who is being forced to be married? They ever watch that movie? They're in a forced marriage or a convenience relationship or a partnership deal. They're part of it. And then look at Rapunzel. I mean, girls really love her. They want to wear those princess dresses, but she had a mother who kept on telling her, "You're nothing without me. You know, you're ugly. You don't think," or everything that she told, and you can't survive without me. So you can't go outside of this place of limitation. And so you see all those are conditionings. And most of the stories are usually called fairy tales. They actually have very negative messaging.
Very dark stories.
But you see, those are also childhood traumas in terms of they conditioned our traumas and they make them feel tolerable because one day we were hoping someone will come and rescue us. Sometimes we look at the story of Cinderella and we really idolize it. But I'm just like, this guy sat in the palace, never bothered to run after her when she ran out so that she can see the mouse and the tattered clothes. He would have seen that and loved her for that. But he sat down, she ran away, and then later he didn't even bother to go and look for her. He sent someone with a shoe to go all around and look for her. If you find her, then lucky for her.
And if the shoe never fed her, if he didn't find her, what would it mean?
He just moves on and marries the next person, you know? So sometimes we really like, I want to be Cinderella. No, Cinderella was actually with marrying someone who probably didn't really care about her. But was that the conditioning when you were growing up? And so most of the narratives we have, even from our childhood, in terms of things we watched. For example, it's possible to, even the way you're saying about generational patterns, to be in dysfunctional marriages because that is what we saw. And so it becomes acceptable. I don't learn to expect better. And then, of course, now I get into a dysfunctional marriage and then my daughter observes me and then she doesn't know how to expect better. Especially if none of us have, because most of the childhood, most of the generational traumas, sometimes they even look like generational curses in terms of this happened to this family, this happened. But you don't understand, if generations don't have self-awareness, then it keeps on perpetuating. It will just be a pattern that replays even for 100 years.
So, for example, like I never experienced my mother's trauma, for example, that made her maybe get into a relationship which was dysfunctional. She got into the relationship as a result of the trauma. She was attracted to someone who maybe it was abusive because of the abuse she experienced as a child. Now, I come as a child who has never experienced what my mother experienced, but now I observe her marriage. And maybe nobody abuses me, but I observe my mother being abused. And so I see that is normal. And so when I go out to the dating pool, I look for the exact same person so that I can recreate my childhood because this is normal. And so things are passing as a pattern. It's not necessarily that people are being wounded, but I have observed. I think the other day I was with my niece and I pushed my sweater. I like when I'm sitting, I like to stretch my sweater over my knees. And I was talking to her, my sister-in-law, and she was telling me, she saw me doing it. And then she told me, oh my gosh, the niece did exactly that. So when I was doing that, I never knew that she was observing. She was observing me. And without realizing that this is just a bad habit that I have. She was copying me. And even when she was doing it, she was not aware. Like my daughter, my sister-in-law, yes, she was just saying that she was eating, and she was watching TV, she stretched her sweater. Because I do it without even realizing it. And I thought it was so powerful that kids are watching you. Like whatever you do, your child, if your actions and your coping mechanisms are dysfunctional ways of coping with a wound that you have not healed, then your child will adopt those dysfunctional habits without experiencing the wound, but living in the result of the wound. And that was very that's very scary for me. That's very, I don't know if I've made sense. I've just said a lot of words.
No, it makes sense, because there's that part of, most of the times, because the way we were saying, children don't have emotional vocabularies. Their conditioning is more on observation. And that is why we say our children become who we are, not what we say.
Ooh.
You know, and so if there is a conflict in that, like eventually they will just manifest who I was. They will not necessarily manifest what I would want for them. And that is why sometimes how you condition your child is being able to tell them, this is not okay. Yeah, I know I'm going through this, probably I'm struggling with it, but it doesn't have to be your story.
Don't take it as the
you know, like you deserve better, you should want better. You know, probably we are growing up in poverty. It's possible for you to live in abundance. You know, you go and dream about the car you want to drive and everything. It doesn't have to be your narrative, because all these things, including even poverty can actually be part of childhood trauma.
No, it can be.
Yes. Because every time we just like, first of all, I can't marry someone without money. And of course that now still is a trauma response in terms of the decision. Or I can't get married to someone who doesn't have money, you know? And of course, what that does, it first of all filters out, you're not making it from lens of health. You're actually making that decision from lens of trauma. And so your judgment is impaired.
You know, like when I think about, for example, the Bible, where I see like a childhood trauma being passed, at least in my opinion, I think it is in the story of Jacob and Esau. And theirs is so subtle, but the impact of it is so magnified. You have Rebecca, and I think the father was the father was called what? The father was called Ish. Was it Ish? The father of Jacob was Isaac. Isaac. So you have Isaac and Rebecca, who intentionally decided one liked one and the other one liked one. And of course, there'll be an impact on a child, because you know that your mother loves you, but your father only loves the other one. There was extreme favorism, and the result of it was chaos. One brother had to cheat the other brother, and one brother threatened to kill the other brother. And this same Jacob, this dysfunctional, because favoritism is not a healthy style of parenting. This same Jacob takes this same philosophy that he observed as a child, which cost him also. He had to run for his life, you know, and it was very costly for him in many ways. He takes this same method of parenting and brings it to his own home and makes sure, first of all, he makes sure the wives know I favor one over the other. And that brought a lot of chaos within the home. And then he goes further and makes sure that all the sons know that Joseph is his favorite. And I think in the verse it says that he's in Genesis it says that he what does the verse say? Let me see if I can.
You have neat notes over there.
I can read it. It says it says that he said that he was his favorite and his brothers hated him. You know, like it doesn't even hide. It says that because he was the favorite of the father, they hated him. You know, like, and so I don't know if I can. I don't know, where is the verse. I hate when my notes are.
Of course, it's in Genesis.
I just know it's in Genesis.
I'm honestly not sure which chapter exactly.
It's Genesis 37. It says, now Israel loved Joseph more than many of his other sons, because he had been born to him in his old age. And he made an ornate robe for him. When his brothers saw their father loved him more than any one of them, they hated him. Not they disliked him. They hated him and could not speak a kind word to him. So this is what he does to his son. And as a result, his son is sold because of that hate. But it's very interesting that what happened to him in his home, he passed it on to his son. And I think that was it's just very enlightening to see that sometimes you can pass on something without even being conscious. Like I don't think Jacob was conscious of what he was doing. He was just doing what he had seen being done in his own home. He wasn't conscious of the impact that it would have on his son. He was just doing what his parents showed him, that as a parent it is okay to have favorites.
Actually, there's the special child effect is trickle down. Ishmael and Isaac, you know, the fathers still had to choose. You know, it's like something that had started with Abraham. And you see, it's in terms of everybody needs to realize that most of the dysfunctions that have to do with childhood trauma, they're actually based on sin. People who didn't have probably faith in God, people didn't trust God, people didn't turn to God. Because like Abraham, it was him and Sarah going out of their way of God's promise. That is how they ended up there. With now Ishmael that they had to send away. Was that the best that God had for them? Probably not.
It was not. Yeah.
And then trickle down, there is now the dynamic of Isaac with his 2 sons. Was that the best way to probably handle the situation? Maybe not. But sometimes does it also reflect, much as that is, they look like couple goals, but then also that marriage also had a dynamic that was unhealthy.
Yeah, it was very unhealthy.
Because you remember, Rebecca is Laban's sister. They had come from very cunning families. I mean, they were the masters of con games, because she would con her own husband by having her son trick him.
Yeah, because he was following his mother's instructions.
And then Laban later would actually get back at the son who thought he had won. He'll now be his slave.
And then what did Jacob do?
Trickle down.
Even and then his sons also cheated him that their brother died. And so it's like something being passed on from generation to generation.
And I actually love it that you probably, it ended with Joseph. And one of the things that sometimes we underestimate in our journey and battles in childhood trauma, because when you look at the stories in the Bible, Joseph was probably the person who was most highly traumatized. And why? It's because his story doesn't have any record of him being on the wrong side. Apart from Moshe,
And the thing that is so powerful, the people don't understand how deep childhood wounds are. When you look at the Bible, Joseph is sold. We don't hear him complaining.
No.
Joseph is moved from prison. The people forget him. He had a very traumatizing experience.
But even just his brothers, the fact that he didn't have a brother that was on his corner, that is traumatic.
The only time he cried later, but the time he cried was when he after many years, he saw his brothers and he remembered what they had done to him. He was a grown man, very successful, now the governor in Egypt. But the memory of what his brothers did to him still hurt him. That true. Childhood wound was still there. And I thought that was
and you can imagine by then, surely there was no therapy. Unapambana na hali yako. And one of the things that probably we underestimate when you look at the story of Joseph, it's the power of God's redemption in our wounds. I think most of the times we really underestimate. For me, I really honor therapy. I am a therapist myself. I'm a life coach. Like, this is what I do every day. But many people underestimate the power of God. Number one, God's power to just deliver me from even those trauma kind of those pictures, and those triggers and everything. And at the same time, we also underestimate sometimes the power of God's word. Because until my conditioning comes to truth, it's not even true, because true is factual. You can go to the court of law and win a case because facts are here. But then there is truth in terms of what does God say about this situation. And so when we underestimate that part, because I can choose to live on opinions in terms of this is my own conclusions of the situation. Of course, that one you can't win a case. But at the same time, even when you have facts, you can have facts and you get justice, but you still lose. Because sometimes justice doesn't give me the kick that I want one day in my life. And when you look at the story of Joseph, there was actually that factor. In terms of one day he got into power, he would have sued Potiphar's family.
Yes,
he would have sued them. When he got to the place of power, probably he had some evidences here and there. He would have locked his brother or even probably execute all of them. He had power. But what had happened is how God had changed his heart through truth. And that is what will change probably the narrative of our lives and sometimes also overcome some things. I look at myself and I think like, I'm actually someone who went through a lot of trauma in my childhood in terms of that sibling rivalry dynamic that was very unhealthy. In terms of probably being raised by a mom that I felt like we didn't connect much back then. Right now, we just like this. And of course, also having a dad that was absent, which was stressful for mom. In a way, I could actually see so many trauma kind of responses and just trauma behavior in myself, including sometimes some of us, because of our sibling rivalry and just feeling that injustice, we come and play out those dynamics at our workplace. You can never get along.
We actually bring it
team
to
building. Kila saa unakwanga tu like, work on your people skills, work on your...
You have to be
but
the
you don't
best,
understand that it's not something I need to condition myself outwardly. I need to actually deal with my pain. Because my pain plays out with my colleagues. They're like siblings that I have to fight as an adult.
I like the way you've highlighted that that childhood trauma, it just doesn't play out in relationships, in love relationships. It plays out in the workplace. It plays out in your friendships. It's so sneaky. It finds its way in, like it cuts across in your parenting, in your everything. And so like you're saying, like there has to be a way to, you need to find a way to heal. And I just want to ask you this. How important is it to forgive?
How important is it to forgive? Number one, I think that is 200% of the work, and it's the hardest work. And one of the things I usually say, number one, you need to just tell yourself, I did my best. Do you know, surviving the fact that you came here, you are an adult? I mean, that is such a big deal. Like you grew up, like you outlived all the things that would have killed you back then. Like, for example, if it's me, I would have committed suicide at 15. I did not. Like just the fact that that night I chose to live, or God helped me live, like that should be such a success story that you tell from the rooftops. Just the fact that you survived back then. Because you know what? Whatever was coming at you. That is why when Joseph is concluding the story of his life, he's like, whatever you meant for evil, God meant for good. Like everybody needs to find closure and resolve that has nothing to do with anyone in their lives. In terms of, I want to heal for me. Whether I will ever get a sorry, whether I will ever get closure, whether I will ever get an apology, whether anyone will ever understand me and see things from my perspective, I just want to heal. And I think that is the most powerful decision you make. And of course, when you think about healing, is also choosing a path in terms of, you can't sit down and hope for the best. Go for therapy, the power of community. Surround yourself with healthy people. Do you know, sometimes it's also possible in my trauma response, I choose friends who are traumatized. I marry someone who is traumatized. I work in highly dysfunctional workplaces. That becomes my reality because I show up in a dysfunctional place. I go home to a dysfunctional place. I hang out with in a dysfunctional space. Like my coffee dates are still toxic. Much as I keep on feeling, yeah, you know, girls, we are going for a holiday, but we are going for holiday.
Toxicity.
5 toxic people, you know? And so you need to start telling yourself, I need to know what health looks like. I need to first of all want health, and then I need to start choosing health. And so I need to ask myself, Paps, so what, when you are in your healthiest self, who will you be? What will you do? How will you behave? Who do you see around you that you feel like this is a healthy person? Start hanging out with them. Start inclining towards health. You can't keep on living in the gutters and still hope for good aromas. Your perfumes are not in the gutters. You'll just smell like the gutter. And that is why when you look at Joseph, do you realize he even married from the palace? Like self-esteem ilikuwa imepanda hivi. But one of the things that we don't understand, it's the power of a relationship with God in healing us from the dysfunctions of our childhood, because you will never replay your childhood. You will never have that gift again. In terms of Paps is now 5 years old. I'll never relive. And so what I'm doing, I'm reparenting myself right now by showing up in a functional way to myself. I'm speaking to myself with more empathy. Sometimes I even have that conversation of, Paps, calm down. It's okay. You'll be fine. It's like you learn to talk to yourself kindly. And of course, the third thing, learn to also believe what God says about you. Okay. So that you can override all those, because you need to recondition yourself to be able to now see life from a different perspective and to be able to also see yourself from a different perspective. Because the best you can do in terms of how you show up is how you see yourself. That is how everyone will perceive you. And if that narrative doesn't change, then you keep on attracting wrong. In romantic relationships, in friendships, in even work opportunities, you just look like someone that can be abused, overworked, underpaid.
Oh, you're the abuser. You know, it can also be.
Oh, yeah. By the way, you can also be on the other side of the fence.
You can be the person who
you look
is
for people you can
inflicting.
abuse. You look for a spouse you can control and abuse and manipulate. You look for friends you can also control and manipulate. You know, sometimes probably I will choose friends that are financially incapable. And honestly, sometimes people also underestimate the power of having also resources and being resourced and having money in getting out of childhood trauma. Because most of the times you are able to choose better. You're able to choose better. For example, you can be in an abusive relationship and having abusive people all around you. And it's because they are supporting you, they are helping you. And so, you know, you keep on just receiving it because you feel like a victim. Just the power of being resourced. Invest in yourself, read books, you know, just listen to podcasts, watch YouTube, like liberate yourself at all cost. But the most powerful liberation that I am still probably emphasizing in the childhood trauma, just having journeyed through it myself, having had clients who are very highly traumatized, you know, just seeing someone who comes and they have panic attacks, they can't even get to your office for a session before like 3 panic attacks, and just seeing God heal them and God restore them. I think for me, I still believe in the power of God in helping us knock out of anything that has ever happened to you, that even psychologists will say you can never heal from this. God's power can actually heal us. And God's truth can liberate us.
No, that's very true. And I think that a lot of people get stuck in the healing. And I may be wrong, but I feel like by not forgiving, and I don't know how people forgive without God. I don't know if you're not able to find a way to forgive. I do find that sometimes you can find yourself becoming the thing which you don't want to be. There is a way that it leads to bitterness. Like forgiveness, I believe is such an important thing, but it's also a hard thing to do as a human being. And I think that even for our parents, depending on your childhood, I don't know what childhood traumas that people might have. Whatever childhood traumas you are, I think it's sometimes also putting ourselves in the shoes of those who came before us and understanding
like
their history.
Yeah.
I think maybe if you do understand that maybe they were neglected in the same way, or maybe like you're saying, maybe it's a parent who's a single parent and they can't give you everything. They were not bad. They just were not able to give you everything that you could. And and just understanding, in trying to understand them, it can help you even better understand yourself.
Very
and I
true.
think that the history of those who, if you have parents and you can talk to them, I think it's very important to sit down with them and find out what is their story, what were their experiences
What was
as
going on?
children, where do they come from? It might help give you more wisdom in how to proceed, or even understand yourself better. Because sometimes you behave in a certain way, like we've talked, like you respond to certain ways because of what you have.
Very true.
You have seen. But
Absolutely.
I do believe like forgiveness is so important. And like you said, that self-awareness. Can you sit with
self-awareness? Yes. And of course, I just love what you've said. Whatever you do not release, you will replay. Whatever you do not release, you will replay. Because one day you will also be on the receiving end. Either you will be too permissive in terms of allowing dysfunctions in your space, or you'll be the one who is initiating the dysfunctions. And when you talk about that part of, I need to also empathize with probably my parents and everyone, it's because it's possible to live on a wrong narrative all your life. In terms of that was a wrong version of the story.
Yeah.
You are probably playing the role. You remember that aspect of the villain and the victim, and probably the person who was now the hero. It's possible for you to be thinking you're a hero all along, but you're probably the victim.
Yeah.
And it's possible for you to be thinking you're a victim all along, but you're actually the hero in the story. In terms of, you really inspired many people. Look like Joseph. If he had a victim mentality all his life, he would have never left the prison. He would have died in the prison.
He would have died there
because he would see himself as a prisoner. But every time he saw himself as, I'm prophetic, I give solutions, even in a prison, mumeota nini, let me give you the vibe of what I think this means. And then that is actually what unlocked the prison for him. Because he kept on showing up as a hero to people's story. He just kept on seeing himself in that posture of a hero. And I really believe it rooted on his relationship with God.
Yeah, because they say that there are three things. Correct me if I'm wrong. There is what actually happened, and if there's two people, how they each saw what happened. So where there is one narrative, there can be three narratives. Because our lens, like you're saying, is affected by our experiences. It's affected by what we saw by our primary caregivers. So the way you see your life, even like when we are talking about self-evaluation, like what informs the way you see life? Is it what your parents did? Is it what your parents? So is it what happened to you? And I think even I've just thought about it. Something that can also be a wound is the death of a parent. That's also a wound. Like the wounds are wide and varied. But also, just to get back to the point that I'm saying, is that like what informs the lens with which you view your life? You need to sit down. Don't believe that the way you see things is the gospel truth. And I think as you get older, you start to realize, oh my gosh, I was told this.
I know. Even when you become a parent, you're like, being a parent is so hard. I know why mom used to shout, It's like you're just like, let me I think I also need some therapy to just get over this. And of course, when you think about it, I love something that you've also said about generational trauma, because one of the things I usually say, don't just heal yourself. Go back to the past, make sense of it so that you can heal the future.
Yeah.
And so when you're thinking about even childhood wounds, don't just think about it's just Paps, because I can live in self-preservation, self-protection, and it's just me, I, and myself. But you see, I need to understand for example, personally, when I did psychology in 2007, I looked back at my generations and I was like, my goodness, I come from such a dysfunctional family. All the things I used to think like we have it together, we are this kind of a family. I actually put everything apart. I was like, I really feel bad for my dad. He actually grew up in a home that had put so much pressure on him. And then there was also such a control in terms of what success looks like, according to them. They were so controlling about the decisions you will make. I look back at my mom, I'm like, by the way, this girl has really loved God. She grew up in a family that didn't even go to church. You know, like God was not the center of her family. So she's really come a long way. Okay. You actually appreciate their battles when you go down the road to see where they came from. Okay. And then, of course, now you start asking yourself, what can I do better? Because personally, doing better is learning to even realize I never got an apology for my parent for all the even wrong conclusions they had about me, all the assumptions, all the misjudgments. But I can apologize to my daughter because I'll still judge her because I also have a lot of trauma responses. Most of the times we replay how we were raised. But then how you fix it in terms of you reparent yourself and you parent better. Okay. So that I keep on saying like, this was done to me. And you see, that is different from trauma response, because I can grow up in a background of poverty and then I'm like, my children will never lack. In a way, I'm willing to go to hell and willing to violate all my values so that they never lack, which is a different place from a place of, I want to teach my children to think abundance much as I thought limitations when I was growing up. Those are two different premises. And of course, for me, I'm still coming back to this place of the perspective of God, even handing that down to my generation in terms of I may not totally heal from my trauma in my lifetime. Probably I will still have those explosions every now and then. I'll still have that anxiety every now and then. But then I will also be in this place where I keep on knowing, I know how to come back, and then I teach my children how to come back in case I will still get them to that place. Because sometimes also, let me just say this as probably another perspective, sometimes we even overrate the power of therapy in healing our wounds. Therapy is amazing. But one of the things that I always believe, I also go for therapy. I do, and I really believe therapy helps, but therapy doesn't fix you. And so I need to come to a place of realizing that therapy heightens or improves my self-awareness, and then I'm able to submit those places to God more. And so I'm coming, like even my prayers become so intellectual. I'm like, Lord, I'm struggling with trauma bonding. Lord, I'm struggling with codependency. Lord, I have insecure attachments. You know, you come and now you learn to submit those places you've discovered to God. But whenever we hope that therapy can fix me and that person is the one who is responsible, then I'll keep on moving all my life, feeling like I'm a broken person. And because I don't feel better, nothing is fixing me. But God is the only one who has the power to fix us, especially from things that are so deep, things that are so broken, places that we are so broken. In a way, probably you've gone through even rape and such traumatic incidences, like even a friend of mine who went through, gang rapes, several of them. It's only God who can really heal her. And you see how it also plays out in terms of how healing looks like in God's term, even from childhood trauma. It is 2 Corinthians 4:8. It says like we are jars of clay, but we carry this treasure, so that everybody who looks at me, they'll actually see that it's not Paps. There's something more in her. Okay. And I believe that is how God had intended for healing to look like. It's not like I am now a powerhouse, I'm now a strong room. It's actually, people can still see, that is a jar of clay. It's so fragile. She doesn't look like she has it together, but how comes there's just something about her? Something about her. And I believe that is what healing looks like on God's terms. Otherwise, when we are hoping that one day I will never remember anything that happened to me, I will probably never, because one of the things, like I've said, you can't go back to your childhood and live your childhood again. Like that is something you've lost permanently. And that is why healing in the literal version of everything is perfect about me will never happen. I never had a perfect family growing up. I will never have a perfect family. Like in terms of when I was in primary school, like that will never be my reality. And so it will be like right now, whoever I am, mirror so beautiful, such a beautiful portrait in a way nobody will believe where I came from. But I'm still that earthen jar, because every time I'll keep on reminding people, I was a suicidal teenager. I was a failure in high school. And so even when someone is like, Betty, how do you think about all the things you say? I'm like, it's just God. Because for me, I always remember that 15-year-old, that is the reality of my version. Everything else that I have become and have done and have achieved, it has been number one, self-awareness. Number two, number one is God. It has just been God's grace and God's kindness to me. And then, of course, there's a lot of self-awareness. There's a lot of personal development. There's a lot of intentionality. There's a lot of surrounding myself with probably people who are life-giving and not just people who are sycophants and they tell me what I want to hear. People also tell me hard truths, you know? And of course, also that aspect of having a vision of the possibilities of what I can be when I am healed. And so every day I strive towards that. I strive towards that. And every time I keep on reminding myself, I am still that jar of clay.
Okay. Just having you today has been so inspiring. You know, we've also learned so much about connecting the childhood wound and how it shows up in us when we are adults. It has been so enlightening, and I hope that our listeners today have learned, because you know sometimes you can find yourself in a circle that's going round and round and not realizing that there is just a wound that needs to be healed. I hope that everyone who's watched this episode will be ignited today. Ignite yourself to be more self-aware. Ignite yourself to be more self-awareness. Ignite yourself to be more aware of what is going on. And just thank you so much for tuning in. It has been so wonderful having you in the studio today.
It's been my joy. Thanks for having me again. It's always a pleasure coming back to Ignite.
Yeah. I hope you'll come back again.
Definitely. You might find me here next week.